Welcome, ladies and gents, to the Star Network. We are doing Tar Tales in the News. My name is Richard Grannon, the International Ambassador of the Star Network, and I am joined by the Executive Director, Dr. Jamie Huysman. Thank you for joining me, sir.
Oh, it's a pleasure always, Richard.
So we're going to start with a particularly tragic story, and then I think we're going to extrapolate out from that what the inferences and the consequences are in terms of processing trauma and the objectives of the Star Network. Could you please clue people in on what has happened and the particulars of the case?
I will. We're going to talk, obviously, and I wish I didn't have to talk about the Reiner murders. That was a tragedy that was like no tomorrow. That was also the quintessential, I'd say, benchmark of all things that are wrong with the addiction world. But for me, my fascination, just briefly for you and the audience, is the health and entertainment, because I worked so long in talk television, working with talk court and reality shows, because they were always exploited by the mentally challenged were always exploited by the talk court and reality shows to do programs. They would bring them up to New York or Los Angeles, pay them $100, give them a hotel, and afterwards forget they ever knew them. I called them in the 90s my first stars, my first survivors of toxic abusive relationships. But I did learn back then that health and entertainment were somehow important to combine. We were trying to get solutions to the audience of talk television, the Geraldos, the Montels, the Lisas, because they all would show problems. They would show anorectics, and they showed addicts and alcoholics, and we would take them finally to treatment. So I learned that health and entertainment, certainly in America, and I think the rest of the world, could be paired together. The salacious, the exploitive, don't just show problems, but let's show solutions. So when Rob Reiner obviously was murdered by his son and Michelle Reiner, let's not forget about mom here. It was an absolute tragedy beyond belief that really talked terribly, if you will, or challenging, I should say, about the addiction world, about parents who care so much about their sons and their daughters who have mental challenges. It was about where do I go? It also talked about the state of psychology and where we're at in terms of providing proper information to families that are tragically lost when they have mental health challenges. So where do I go to talk about it? With my international ambassador, who's a podcaster.
There's a couple of issues, I suppose. We're speaking the same language, and we're hyperlinking them. For people outside of America, when you're talking about the addiction world, you're talking about the entire complex industry of trauma and addiction recovery, right? And that's developed in a certain way over the years. And now it's at a point where it really needs to be updated because it's really letting people down. Is that fair?
Very fair, except I wish that you were the program director, because you said addictions and trauma. And don't get me wrong, trauma obviously was addressed. I became a trauma therapist in the 90s, if you will, a long time ago, dealing with police officers and first responders in the military. And you mentioned it together in that question just now. But I think we have unfortunately gravitated 80% to the addiction world, not knowing what to do with the trauma world. So in the case of Rob Reiner and his family, they were in the addiction world, I think, for the most part, when they placed their son reportedly in almost 18 treatment centers, I believe, which is absolutely unheard of, unless you had the money to be able to actually do that. He was more now in the addiction world, though he had a lot of mental health challenges, and I'm sure he was put in psychiatric hospitals as well. The concept of trauma, which you mentioned, it should be paired at least, I believe, 70-30.
Yeah.
More, 70 for trauma, 30 for addictions, because I think addictions are a symptom, if you will. They're a byproduct. They're a solution to trauma, not necessarily the problem. He got caught, I think, in the world of the disease concept, where alcoholism and drug addiction and any addiction is a disease of the mind. And we've pushed this concept years and years, whereas psychology now has changed a whole lot. And I think it's been slow going because of shame and stigma worldwide into this neuroplasticity world that you can change your brain, that we can be our own trauma coach. So at the end of the day, we're stuck, like the pharmaceutical industry, in this disease concept sort of mirrored matrix.
Yeah.
And so I think they got caught, like many people do, if they have the resources. We're only talking about the 1% of the people that actually has the resources to go to addiction treatment.
Because it's expensive.
Very
In America,
expensive.
it's very expensive. So just at this point, we could say maybe the reason why, because it's something that I'm dealing with at the moment with my followers in narcissistic abuse, as you're trying to find better and better solutions. And I'm thinking, God, sometimes it really feels like we're just running around the house here. You know, it's running around the houses. People get a bit better. They feel a bit more cheerful and a bit more optimistic. But are we dealing with the root cause? And I think sometimes it's easier. I just think it's a side effect of human psychology to say, this is the problem, not this.
Yes.
Because this is confusing. It's the bottle of whiskey. It's the line of Coke. It's the ex-wife or ex-husband, not this. And if I invite people to look at this, I see them getting really stressed out.
Sure.
They get stressed out. Whereas if I say, okay, we'll have a program that talks about the external thing, everybody's more, yeah, that's it. That's what my problem is. I'm an alcoholic. That's what my problem is I'm an addict or I'm a survivor of narcissistic abuse. And as time goes by and I do more work with people and I'm filtering through all the time, trying to digest and process what's going on, I'm thinking, okay, try and be smart. Try and think in fresh ways. Don't think dogmatically just because you said a clever thing 2 years ago. What's really happening here? And there seems to be something upstream of all these problems, which we call as a generic holding term for now trauma.
We do. And then we have to discern sometimes between trauma as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD,
Yes.
which entered the DSM, I think it was 3 in the 80s as a diagnosis, and then complex PTSD, which is more death by 1,000 cuts, which
And
is
that still
childhood.
hasn't entered.
And still has not. And we don't have CPTSD yet in the DSM-5, which is our Bible for actual reimbursement and for diagnoses. But to your point—
Thank you for saying it's a Bible for reimbursement before you said diagnoses.
It truly is. It truly is. I hate diagnoses because I'm a pretty patient clinician. I think therapy and being a social worker has allowed me to be patient because I don't like diagnoses in any way. And you're right, it's a reimbursement tool because all the data and all the clinical things keep coming in. This is a family issue. So you might meet John, but you haven't met John's mom or John's dad or John's children or John's, grandparents. So diagnosis constantly changes as the data comes in. So I am not like, let's say borderline personality disorder or ADD. It's a dumpster when we don't know so often that we put it in there. But to your point, Taranon, which is our support program that we're globally scaling, which is Toxic Abusive Relationships Anonymous, was a vital function. I for one, am also in recovery for codependency because there was no other sort of way to explain the hero concept or all our healthcare professionals, why we got in there to help people. But we learned this as a child. The hero, the lost child, the scapegoat, quote unquote, John Bradshaw's family of whatever. It really wasn't that. It really wasn't that at all. It was what Pete Walker says, it was the fawn response.
Yes.
And the fawn response was that we were more neurosafe in our family to become whatever they want us to become as a child.
Give yourself away.
Yeah, we gave sacrifices to our moms and dads. We were told, children should be seen and not heard. I mean, innocent abuses. You and I were talking about guilt and shame. I'm disappointed in you. These were more in our tattooed minds the first 8 years of John Locke, tabula rasa, the blank chalkboard that we walked on was there. And so addictions are more of a solution than a problem. And so at Taranon, we started seeing so many people from other programs come in, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, because the rates of relapse are so high. And I just realized, we're treating symptoms for $50,000 for 30-day lengths of stays. We're not treating the problem. So in the Reiner murder case, and again, I want to say to the audience, they're not my patient. It's not ethical for me to really assume that I know clinically what's going on in their family. But from afar, being that I used to run treatment centers and that I'm no stranger to the world of addictions as an addiction counselor, I think you do get caught into this matrix and you become a family that does not know what to do any longer. And we can't assume that obviously it was strictly a diagnosis of addiction because there was so many comorbid mental health issues.
Sure,
And
sure.
I heard recently somebody threw out that there was an actual diagnosis of schizophrenia, again, which has a myriad thought. It's a thought disorder. So it has, paranoid, hebrophenic. We have all these different. And when voices talk to you, I used to work in the deinstitutionalization days when they opened up the state hospital, but mostly your diagnoses if you are institutionalized and you know it well. But the voices that tell you to do things, and this is, I'm sure, going to be the case of Nick Reiner and in California about murdering his parents. The mitigating issues was he psychotic, and was voices telling him to do this? Right. I'm sure that's going to be the lawyer's approach.
It's interesting. You arrive there at the voices in someone's head, because when I look at narcissistically abusive relationships, emotionally abusive relationships, and resolving them, and then we look at the pre-existing childhood trauma that is so frequently present in the victims, self-reported victims of narcissistic abuse. And I'm thinking, what's upstream of everything that we can do with them? What's upstream of every therapeutic modality or solution or whatever we can offer that could be damaging their capacity to take on the therapy and take on the healing? I'm left with the voices in the head, or in psychoanalytic language, the superego injunctions. There's an internal, you say, you have a good way of phrasing it linguistically, mum's voice, dad's voice. That's a nice way of saying it. So primary caregiver's voice and primary caregiver's intention as well. I don't want you. You're annoying me. I'm a drug addict. I have my own problems, whatever. The child is screaming. The child needs care. You're taking up bandwidth that I want to expend on alcohol or acquiring my next fix. Now I'm angry with you. Whatever the situation is, the child is stuck in a cycle of trying to be, and every time they try to be, the parent punishes them or neglects them or humiliates them or God knows what. And that's...
Or does what their parents did, right? Generational trauma. We say, if you don't break the trauma will break you.
Yes.
And so let me delineate two things on the voices side. I think it's a great comparison, which you bring up. It really helps the audience and helps me, helps anybody get out of the psychoanalytic DSM-5 world.
Yes.
So the voices that may have been speaking to Nick, obviously, were voices that were ordering him. They were autocratic voices. They're voices from afar. The voices that were saying, do this and do that. And they're delusions. They're truly paranoid delusions that are quite different in some ways, because they're almost autocratic, compulsive. And when there's nothing there, and they're telling you what to do, it's an alternative reality. But to go to your voices that you're talking about, which is upstream, mom and dad, you're 1,000% correct. They are part of a continuum, but that mom and dad voice is the voice of relapse. I go to treatment centers and I say, we need to train your case managers and discharge planners on those voices, because they're extraordinarily loud and prominent. We'll treat the symptoms of addiction, how to stop drinking and drugging, and then discharge, go to 90 meetings in 90 days, which are more the lipstick on the pig, as I often say. It's the outer. But why are people relapsing at such high rates? The insurance companies don't even pay for addiction work, because it's almost like going to Las Vegas. It's like a 50.
Really? They won't. The insurance companies won't pay out.
Well, medically necessary becomes now such a deep issue of how long do I pay, and unfortunately, the insurance industry loves this. Why? Because medically necessary they see as detox.
Okay.
They don't necessarily see as the womb of treatment, that you can actually be rebirthed in 30 days of treatment, and it takes 30 to 60. It really takes a year in treatment to play with that tattooed brain and retrain it. But now they're lucky because they don't have to pay so much, because they now use the word medically necessary. But why do they do that? We gave them great reason, I think. We have such a high rate of relapse in the addiction world that they
don't want to take that gamble. I mean,
no, it's astounding. It's putting good money down a bad hole for them.
Yep.
And they say, what? So with cancer or with diabetes, they look at clinical paradigms and say, well, what has the best outcomes? It's interesting to note that there was a study many, many years ago, and they looked at all the treatment modalities. And AA obviously has programs when you come out, and you would think their rates of relapse was less than the other places. Well, they looked at everything, Freudian, Jungian, Skinnerian. They found out the relapse rate was the same with everyone.
Yeah.
When they drilled down and found like 5,000 people in a cohort and measured the longitudinal study of why you stayed sober for 5 years or greater, which was the number, they found out it had nothing to do with the treatment center. It had nothing to do with the tennis courts and the pools and the $100,000. It was the health and wellness of their primary counselor that actually contributed to the 5 years or greater, meaning Conrad Lorenz and imprinting. When you come out of the fog of addiction and you have a healthy person in front of you, mind, body, and spirit, the healthier that primary counselor is, the longer your sobriety will be.
Okay. Stop a second. I have to process, which means the audience definitely has to process, because the implications of what you're saying is very, very profound. So I'm an addict and I'm in recovery. My recovery statistically is not going to be determined by the modality, whether we do chanting or Freudian or crying or punching a pillow, Gestalt style, doesn't matter. It's determined by the health of the person who's guiding me out of the fog of addiction. The healthier they are, the sort of the more coherent and cohesive they are, the better chance I have. This is back to me. That sounds like it's back to childhood. You know, you need the guidance of, maybe you didn't have that. Maybe there is an intrinsic need in little human beings for guidance. And if it needs to be a certain, I'm pontificating now, a certain amount, a certain size, a certain strength. And if it's too low, I'm always going to feel the hunger for, I didn't quite get what I needed. Maybe this line of Coke. Oh, I feel more confident because I needed confidence from them. The alcohol, I now feel more soothed because I needed soothing from them. You've heard of this model lately. We can trace what they're missing by the drugs that they're choosing. So then the way out was the way in, which is, you need somebody who's not bluffing. They really have their shit together and they've really walked their talk. And if they have, then my chance of recovery is so much higher. I think that's fascinating.
You're so right. And it's a corrective emotional experience. But to take it back to childhood, it is the literal reason. If somebody has PTSD, let's take, for instance, somebody in war, an IED, they step on, they lose their leg. What happens? Well, I treat trauma. And so with the person who has a good childhood, or let's say a secure attachment style as a child, and had role models that helped them learn resiliency, that person may get a prosthetic device and go on to run Olympics, Special Olympics of some sort.
Sure.
The person who had the childhood that was hell and damnation, the absolute war zone of a childhood, didn't develop that resilience. They may end up in bed thinking life is hopeless and depressed.
Yes.
And I can't. So to your point, exactly. And to Conrad Lorenz, the imprinting, when he had the ducks, he said, pop out of the eggs and around the fire hydrant. And they all stayed with the fire hydrant.
Right.
They said, Mama, that's Mama. That's the first thing they ever saw.
My mum was a bit of a fire hydrant.
Yeah. Well, a lot are, but
she was about as useful as one as a mum. Sorry, Mum. Sorry.
I love it. No, humor is wonderful. What you were saying when interventions, by the way, are different. The interventions of drum beating, let's say, is more like what you do in the dojo, because I love listening to your YouTubes, and it's to lean in and to do things not cognitively, because we cut ourselves off intellectually at the neck. It's to do things experientially in the body. But going back to your point, childhood is the deal. End of story. Drop the mic. Period. When we do neuroparenting, is which I suggest to people, not to tell your child what to do when you're not doing it, because that's the hypocrisy of life. They'll just run off and get tattoos and say, screw you. Yeah. When you're doing this, neuroparenting, you're going to track them. They're going to see that you're vulnerable, that you go get therapy, that you can fall down 7 times but get up 8.
Yeah.
That pain is inevitable. Yeah, pain is in this world, but suffering is not, because my dad or my mom, knew how to do it. And
they're a good model for
precisely that. And if you have that, you're much less likely to become either the addict, of course, later. Your self-esteem is greater. So I want to point out, going back to the Reiner story, that the voices inside of us from childhood create the self-esteem, the competence, the ability, I can do this or I cannot, because those voices. The voices for Nick Reiner were autocratic, telling you, go and do this and that.
I was just going to say, just on that point, that's the upstream I'm talking about. If we don't fix that, or address it, fix it, maybe it's not the right, address it, deal with it. Everything that we give some clients, like you just said, and people are not going to be either or, they'll be on a spectrum of parental competency and then internal competency and internal resistance. But I've watched this over the years. I'm watching groups of people in a seminar, or a cohort of people I'm working with online, or people I'm coaching. Sometimes I'll give this person the same information. Wonderful, amazing, 3 weeks, I'm out. Thank you so much. I never hear from them again.
Yes.
The person sat next to them, who's the same age, the same background, the same education level, they're like, yeah, it was okay, but. And I'm thinking, well, then it's not the protocol. That's not the key. It's this thing you're talking about. It's that voice, that internalized, modeled resilience, and maybe even hope. Maybe that person doesn't believe because their parents were hopeless or pessimistic, or told them to be hopeless or pessimistic. Whereas this one does. Just to your point, I've read research on PTSD in American vets. This was done with Marines, and they had the same problem. They were putting people through a PTSD program, and like 80% of people would go, "Thank you very much. That's actually a very good PTSD program. Thank you, sir. I'm on my way. Self-report questionnaire. I'm now 80% better." And then there was a group that they were like, nothing stuck. So they changed modalities, they changed protocols, nothing stuck. Eventually, you will not be surprised to hear, eventually they found, when they looked for it, they didn't call it CPTSD, but they were talking about adverse childhood conditions.
Which we're giving the award to Dr. Folletti, who did those studies, the adverse childhood experience studies in the 90s. They're the longitudinal, for your viewer, longitudinal studies. They had over 17,000 people participate. And what came out of that was the people who were relapsing, if you will, from obesity years and years ago, they tied it to when they were traumatized. And so somehow or another, we started learning that adverse childhood experiences were great indicators of health and wellness. For instance, if you had 4 or greater ACEs, you were more likely to be in prison, treatment centers, or, if you will, 10 years shorter lifespan. It was that pronounced, the ACE studies. It would tell you.
Predictive. It was a stable prediction. I only found out last night at dinner, ironically enough. We were in the restaurant, and some of you are health and fitness people I know who are following me, but the ACE concept wasn't psychological. It was actually about recovery from obesity first. And the biggest predictor of recovery from being obese and managing to maintain a healthy weight and everything, he found, was this childhood adverse experiences. It's amazing.
Research, we stumble on the solution. And I was with Dr. Folletti. I was very fortunate to be with him last month in San Diego. And he would be the first to admit it. Him and his researchers were dealing with obesity and stumbled onto the fact that those who could not actually lose weight after they would lose a pronounced amount and return back, they tied it to adverse childhood experiences. And more, the indicators started showing that. And so now, as I said, it's a longitudinal study, and it's fascinating and just game-changing that they say now that trauma and complex trauma is an indicator of health and wellness. So when Gabor Mate does his compassion inquiry, what I do in my day job is, instead of having our doctors say, what's wrong with you, now they say, what's happened to you?
Right.
Which opens up this entire world of social determinants of health, of ACEs, of complex trauma. My dad or my mom did this or that. So anyway, back to Taranon and the program it started teaching me that the people coming in, our 12-step program is different from AA and NA. And AA, it's my life is unmanageable, and I turn it over to a power greater than myself, which again, Richard, is great, and it's probably all we had. And Bill and Bob that started the program saw the externalization, and what to do. They did the right thing. They created 12 steps, and they put people in groups called AA meetings because they were co-regulation. However, we didn't have the science really attached. And so now, today, being a recovering codependent myself, I see we were just dealing externally with these, again, lipstick on a pig sort of things and symptoms, and realizing what we call it Taranon, we go into the primordial muck of codependency. We go into that tattooed brain, because the first 8 years, let's not even talk about in utero trauma, because we don't have even research, but the trauma or the complex trauma from childhood is what tattoos our brain. It's ink. And I always say to my clients, or in Taranon, how long does it take laser-wise to take a tattoo off? Well,
Yeah.
it takes a long time. Well, that is your brain, and it was written on with the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response. So, long story short, I have compassion for every level of the attachment scale. In Tara 9, you don't have to forgive your abuser, okay? It's not part of our program. You have to forgive yourself. You have to have compassion for yourself in your recovery program, but you don't have to forgive your abuser. But my compassion extends that exactly what we're talking about. Some people are sicker than others. Some people have worse childhood than others. That's what I say.
Yeah.
And so those who are diagnosed, those 1 out of 8 with the cluster B, with the, whether it's histrionic or borderline antisocial or narcissistic personality disorder, had the most damaging, childhoods possibly known to mankind, where they turned into this kill or be killed sort of mentality that the world is not safe. The rest of us had varying degrees of that. I may go to my therapist, which I do every week, and she may talk about my avoidant personality style or my anxious personality style. So, Marsha Linehan's work is really applicable when she did it. And she was a self-identified borderline, she said, because we all know the cluster B is never my problem. It's got to be yours.
Yes, yeah.
But we did find out that the attachment disorder, the attachment styles, and ways to reach the brain experientially was vital.
So all of this, I think the way out and the way forward is to find and map the places where we've kind of tumbled into a little bit of a fantasy. As you were describing the Reiner case, and just this kind of rigid pattern of sending him back to a treatment center and sending him back to another treatment center. Obviously, neither of us know the ins and outs. We're just using it as a jump off point. I wonder if there's an argument there for saying there's a kind of a shared fantasy between the family, the client, and the clinicians as well, whether this is the solution. It wasn't the solution the last 16 times, but maybe this time it's good. Shouldn't laugh, but it is fantasy based, right? You're living inside of a narrative that says this is the only way out, and this must be the way out. So let's keep doing it and keep hoping. But that really is a fantasy, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's a fantasy. It's a wishful thinking. It's a hopeful thinking that this is a panacea. And I don't know, as parents, we don't know what we're doing. In fact, mental health has been so segmented from the medical world that most people I speak to don't even understand it until it happens to their own family.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, awareness happens. But in their Reiner family, even more things came to. I don't want our viewer to think that there is one size fits all. That if you do have a primary psychiatric diagnosis of bipolar depression or schizophrenia, you may need certainly psychopharmacological interventions like phenothiazines or neuroleptics, that type of thing. There is a myriad of answers that go into that.
We're not two hippies sat here going, oh, we just chat about your trauma and everything will be okay. There are problems that really would be helped with
But what would be the bottom issue here? What is the most empowering part of this is what you and I are talking about. And that is that we can retrain our brain. That even if we're stable on a phenothiazine or lithium or SSRI or however, then the work begins. It's kind of what you've said for many, many years on YouTube. You got to lean in. You got to respect the goddess Nike and just do it. What if we did tell our mentally challenged clients, like myself or anybody else out there, that you need, in the process, to start retraining your brain. You need to start emotionally regulating. That's why Tara 9 is not just for intimate partner abuse of any site or your boss being a toxic person. It's about the toxic relationship we have with ourselves. That if we didn't see a healthy relationship as a child, how on earth could we think that we would have a healthy relationship with ourselves?
Yeah.
So what if we told all of our patients on discharge or during the treatment process, there's a whole lot you can do in the dojo. You can't just go see your therapist once a week and shoot that person up, or come to a treatment center. That in between all these interventions, why don't you start retraining your brain? Why don't you start doing the breath work, the Pilates, the yoga, in your case, the martial arts, the things that really calm your body down? And why don't you go audit all your friends and make sure they're just as healthy and they're meeting you halfway and they're not dragging you down some tar pit, as we say.
Yeah.
So there is an empowering process that can be happening that I don't think you would need 18 treatment centers if you empowered and discharged patients with.
100%. 100%. That I put that in the skills and strengths box. We can do therapy. We can talk about the past. We can talk about your feelings. We can talk about your experiences. But we should also be spending just as much time talking about what skills and strengths do we need to develop here, because they're obviously lacking. And now that I've just said that out loud in this moment, I realize that speaks to a child not getting what they needed in childhood.
Right.
And the instinctive sense of you need building up. It's not that you have, you refer to the disease model. You have this virus inside of you that if we just gave you the antivirals, everything would be okay. It's that we need to strengthen you as a person. We need to skill you as a person so you're more capable in the world.
And that's precisely the reason we created Taranon, Toxic Abusive Relationship Anonymous. Why? Everybody says, what's so different of this 12-step program and others? Well, being a part of the advisory board of the Polyvagal Institute or complex trauma, or seeing the Bessel van der Kolks and how we can retrain our brain, I said we need to create a program that mirrors childhood. That if we didn't get what we needed back then, we can forgive in many ways, unless the parent was felonious and crossed the line. We can forgive sometimes the innocent abuses that they might have done. But at the end of the day, to me, it was, how do we retrain? How do we go back to childhood? How do we reparent ourselves as a 40, 50-year-old person? And so Taranon was created basically to reparent ourselves, to go back into our childhood. This time, our parents wouldn't be telling us what to do. They wouldn't be saying children should be seen and not heard, or,
not seen or heard.
Not seen or heard, precisely. Or I can hit you and scream at you and use guilt and shame. This time we reparent ourselves with the things we never received as a child. To be a parent is not to say I love you. I go to court and I see people charged with felonies screaming from the back of the courtroom, I love you. To be a parent is to be fair, to be consistent, and to be available. They're action steps. And so we say, reparenting yourself, you need to be fair with yourself, consistent with yourself, and available constantly to feel your body, the dysregulation, to emotionally regulate when your body, not your mind. We say, don't listen to your mind. Your mind will screw you up.
It's full of shit.
Full of shit. It'll default.
But the body can't lie.
No, the body can't lie. The body now. So in trauma recovery, we do. So Taranon was kind of creating childhood over, and people do come in because the intimate partner or the boss or the high conflict caregiving. But then they realize, my gosh, I can now reparent myself. I can intervene on this self. And we now don't call it a disease, Taranon. It looks like AA and NA. We call it a lifestyle choice. It's a neurological choice. We were never taught, as Deb Dana, who is the Stephen Portia whisperer, because he's such a scientist and she's a social worker, we've never taught to embrace our neurosystem as a child. Never, ever. We were born in this crazy ass OR with lights, camera, action, giving some person like me cut the umbilical cord. What the hell? I became a therapist because I hated blood. So I'm cutting an umbilical cord, and all of a sudden we pop out of our moms in this calm, 8-9 months gestation time, and it's lights, camera, action. We don't even know the obstetrician because somebody else is on call.
Yeah.
So we're born into trauma.
Yeah.
And so, my gosh, we've never said how to embrace our system. Instead, from that point on, it's do this, do that, do like your grandmother said, do like and our minds get tattooed because it's a blank slate. And so addictions are a solution. And I'm not just saying addictions are a solution for addicts and alcoholics, they're a solution for all of us. Addiction is to do any behavior at all despite adverse consequences. So we do leave the moment, myself included, in codependency, right? It's people, places, and things. Whereas in Taranon, we have to deal with the moment.
Yeah.
We have to because the moment is where we find power, and we don't have the anxiety of tomorrow or the fears of yesterday, but we disassociate. That's what addiction is. We have to leave the moment. So, for me, when we created Taranon, which we're celebrating our 2-year anniversary with thousands of people coming, we're actually retraining our brain based upon what we should have gotten as a child.
Yes. So if people go through and they click the link and go over to the Star Network site, they can register for, these are free Taranon meetings, right?
Free, absolutely free. One of the things, I went to donors and said I wasn't going to be in that 1% again, charging $50,000 where only a few people could access it. You can go to Star Network, you can sign up. And by the way, it is an anonymous program. Trauma recovery is taking your life back. It's authenticity. It's how do I find my authentic path? Because, as Gabor said, the child could never be authentic. It had to be something for somebody else.
Yeah.
How do we take it back? And so at TAR9, if you want, you can go register. You don't even have to come into our meetings with your camera on. You can change your name to Joe Smith or Mary Johnson. And then as you start feeling neurosafe, and we have hundreds and hundreds of people a night coming, they'll start turning the camera on. They'll become a little bit more connected. What they have now is a family of choice. They have a family that meets them halfway, that bears witness to their pain, that doesn't judge them. And they themselves have to keep coming back to change their brains and change their lives. So in that way, yes, it's free. If you go to starnetwork.org, it sounds almost like an advertisement, but actually it's free. It's like any Alcoholics Anonymous program, except it's how do we take our life back?
Fascinating. So as far as this individual case with the Reiners, when you were looking at it, was there any major takeaway that you had from that where you just thought, I wish this could have been different. I wish this was processed in a different way?
Richard, there's so many different takeaways from this case because I worked in television for years. In fact, I'll be part of an upcoming series on the Wild West of Talk TV, which is coming out, I think, on Showtime in the next several months.
That's going to be a fun watch.
Oh, my gosh, because it was
It really was the Wild West when you were in it.
It was almost worse than the Wild West. For me, it was absolutely like we were talking the other night, like the mafioso, because it is kind of, talk about shared fantasy. We have sponsors buying commercial times when the rapist is going to be coming out in the third segment and maybe he violated his daughter so we can get the rating sweeps,
Narcissistic psychopathy to the hilt, isn't it?
To the hilt and being supported at the top. Geraldo would always look at me when I testified against Time Warner in the Jenny Jones case. I said, I have to go against the industry, my friend, because they lit the fuse. He says, don't ever forget, Jamie, we wouldn't do that if Johnson & Johnson didn't buy soap on our ad time. And I started thinking, television was basically content in between advertisements.
Yeah.
And if anybody at the top says, we're not going to advertise if you bring that addict out or do this to this person. So back to your story, back to the Rob Reiner question. I lived in LA and New York a lot. And so there's a lot of factors to consider here. It's always better to look good than to feel good in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Image is everything. But Rob and Michelle Reiner were just family members who didn't know what to do, and they were lost in the sauce like everybody in this world when their child comes home with a mental challenge. The other two children seemed to be very loving and very connected, and this person seemed to have a primary psychiatric diagnosis. And what do I do, and how do I do it? So for them, they're like every person, except they have the resources to actually listen, if you will, to, I think, ill-begotten sort of sometimes things. Again, if insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, then that's what the encouragement of our addiction industry does as well, is keep coming back here into an inpatient environment and it'll work, as opposed to looking at the whole piece here, the how do we retrain our brains, psychopharmacology, this is the group you go. So in the Reiner case, it's like any case, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, that was the O.J. Simpson trial of relationships, taught us about narcissistic abuse, taught us about reactive abuse. In this particular case, because I worked years ago with institutionalized patients, I worked with parents who did not know what to do. In NAMI, the National Alliance of Mentally Ill, and their child was aging out of services. You have a whole group that depended upon a world, a medical world and psychiatric world that let them down as well. That we came from our own, if I've got a hammer, everything's a nail world. Yeah. And so to them, they were scared. And at the end, they were even more scared because the hallucinations and the paranoid sort of voices, I think, were coming more and more. They were also scared of not knowing what to do. And I think, again, the big picture, and I'm ending it here, is that our society has created such a massive amount of shame and stigma associated with mental health that we've set it aside from the medical world. We detached it in its own silo. It became, shoot the witch or dunk the drunk, or it became, in India, touched by the hand of God. No, this is a medical issue, just like diabetes, it's like, heart issues, and we never saw it as that.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that's that is the tragic side of it. Can I just ask you personally, if they if the parents came to you directly and said, my son's been through 17 different treatment centers, we've got nothing, would you try? Would you have been open to trying to work with him? And how confident would you have felt that you could have maybe done something that nobody else could?
That's interesting because I too evolved. I will say that because, as you know, I many years ago was in a toxic abusive relationship, and a lot of my mind opened up as a therapist. I was, in the 90s being trained as a trauma therapist, but really didn't understand it until I had to meet somebody and go through that hell.
It's one thing reading the book. It's another thing going there, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
You read the brochure and you go, oh, that sounds terrible. But then when you go to that place,
I feel bad that I gave tests, and when I was teaching it in college, I said I didn't know anything until I did. But to your point, and it's an excellent point, and again involves resources. So in our society, it's very difficult to access. I've had very, very difficult, complex cases. I certainly couldn't speak if I could have done something with this particular case, because all these information that I don't know about may have been also swirling around in this family. So many dynamics, but it's a big caveat. But in my most difficult relationship, I'm thinking about in my mind right now, I did have what we call a clinical person go along. And this is a very wealthy, uber wealthy family who had a child that was very, very challenged. Yep. And I had a very eclectic, holistic, more trauma-driven person. They call them sober escorts before, but I called it a colleague that I put with this person for 3 solid years, that they would literally be there and take them to centers, trauma centers, to clients. They would take them into Mexico to work with shamans, and they would do things experientially in the body, plus work with the mind and if it was a clinical issue and psychopharmacological issue. Most importantly, and this is the most important part, I would only do this and they would only do this for over the 3 years we did it if they brought the family into every treatment modality so that the family was being treated at the same time.
That was at your insistence?
Yeah, that was my insistence. I was overseeing the care. I found this person with a needle in their arm in Soho, and it was a very uber wealthy family, and he had already lost his son to suicide. And I called him up and I said, look, this is going to be a several-year project, and if nothing else, you have some resources to be able to actually do this, not for me, but for all the places I'm going to bring in. So I had to look at this boy in a very holistic way and send somebody with them, as opposed to putting them in places and thinking they get well. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I'll say, I can't say with the Reiner family, it's such a tragic issue that I would have been effective. But in this particular case, this boy has just graduated as a psychiatrist.
Amazing.
Out of a university now in Florida. And he's been sober now for many, many years. He's a runner, a marathon runner. He has a wife and 2 kids, and he's going to be a great psychiatrist when he had a needle in his arm many years ago. So it's that kind of uber resources would have said, trust a whole complicated myriad of, but get one person, like yourself, actually. You've been a phenomenal sort of conductor of that orchestra because you understand the mind, you understand childhood, you understand addictions. So I don't know if I would have made any difference, obviously, there. It's not fair for me to say that.
You would have attempted it, and I would say I'm fairly confident you wouldn't have done the sort of clanky, outmoded things that come from the disease-based model, or God knows, I don't know what these treatment centers are like. Maybe they're just a money printing service. I've no idea. I've never seen one. I've never seen the inside of one. But that more human approach, systemic approach, which is revealed in the way you talk about it, which is contact with another human being who you're modeling from, and we insist on seeing the whole family.
Absolutely.
That people watching might not realize what a huge upgrade that is in thinking, in the way of processing how the problem should be resolved.
Well, there should be hope too here. When I found out this information, and by the way, the person I sent around with them, she was quite healthy. So every time he came out of another place, a center, a place for treatment, she was there almost to be a corrective emotional experience. But for the listener or for the viewer, this is a more hopeful process. I mean, because in some ways it says that not only can we go see a therapist, not only can we go into a treatment center, but we can be our own coach. Yeah, we can be our own trauma coach in the downtime. Yes. And then we need to take care of ourselves by what? Just 2 things. This is not as complicated as psychotherapy and psychoanalytic work. Yeah. emotional regulation.
Yeah.
When my body is feeling like off, how do I regulate it personally? How do I embrace it? How do I parent my child within? And how do I have healthy people? How do I audit my relationships, all those people bringing me down to the rabbit hole of hell, and keep healthy people that I wish was like my parents and my family early on?
Dr. Jamie, you're obviously very passionate about this. And it's clear that you do have a sense of mission for the project. Where does that come from? Where does the drive come from?
I think it all comes from us personally. Okay. We have to feel it inside. Myself, I know this is my third charity, the STAR Network, and it's the acronym again is Survivors of Toxic Abusive Relationships. I want to make sure everybody understands, again, that intimate partner. It felt right. Probably because the first trauma bond we ever learn is our childhood.
Yeah.
Because of the intermittent reinforcements of mom and dad, the inconsistencies, the Stockholm syndrome is actually learned. So when we get to that relationship, it feels right. But this is all very much personally motivated. I was in treatment. I've been in therapy, I should say, since I was 15 years old. I've been in recovery for codependency, and yet it still befell me as it could befell any human being out there. So I didn't want to run another foundation ever. It's so much work. You're chief cook and bottle washer. You have millions of miles, and hopefully changing the world is what we could all do. But I knew on this one I had to. I was almost touched by the hand of God, if you will. And I said to myself, we needed to create a foundation because I felt the worst public health disaster out there was the attachment disorder. And our inability to train parents, if you will, to train clinicians about really this issue. This was quite preventable, but we're talking about in childhood.
Yeah.
So we developed the STAR Network with 3 pillars as our mission. One, which is we're doing now with Taranon, which is globally scaling, and we'll be joining an AI company called My What If, a storytelling group, and hopefully globally bringing it around the world. That's the support function. The other function is the treatment function, which people don't really understand. Because I know these treatment centers now are going to start having a gold rush for complex PTSD. They're going to create brochures and pretty websites. And again, they're going to start fooling moms and dads that we actually do this properly.
Yeah.
And so our treatment component is oversight.
You see that coming in the next few years?
Oh, I do. This is my world. As I mentioned to you, I'm the car thief that comes back and tells you how to lock your car. I run treatment centers. They will see the gold rush in complex trauma, which is the next way. And we want to have a accrediting body like Joint Commission, or the Good Housekeeping Seal of Approval. We want to send our people like yourself or myself or clinicians in there who can make sure they're doing it right, and that it's a very clinically proper program to serve complex trauma and not just something to gain money for 30-day lengths of stays.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of it, which I think is the North Star, is the prevention component. We're creating neuroparenting programs on obstetric units because we never train anybody about the attachment disorder. We don't tell you how not to create Frankenstein, doctor. And so we go ahead and do that. Okay, nobody understands generational trauma. Nobody understands how to break it. So we're looking to bring prevention programs to teach it. Taranon, the support program, encapsulates totally that. As we neuroparent ourselves and come to our meetings, we're then able to bring it to our children, even if our children are older. In fact, many of our people have gone through parental alienation where the child was weaponized in a high conflict relationship. And we don't promise that you're going to get your child back, but we're creating programs for adults that have been alienated. But we do say one thing: if you don't create a safe environment, you don't attract the energy, nothing will ever happen.
Sure.
So you can at least be taking care of yourself. So today, and maybe, as I said, since, it's limiting, I may see the promised land, we'll never get there. The scaling of Taranon means that we can actually retrain our brains, that we can get better, that we can actually get reunited possibly with kids that were alienated. But at least we can get reunited with ourselves. Okay, at least we don't have to keep shooting up other people to define who we are. I always say, if you had to take that ring off, there's no such thing.
I'm going to steal that. You've all been off shooting up other people. You've been snorting other people again.
We all think that our soulmate is out there, right? And you're our soulmate. Oh, we need you. No, we're the soulmate.
Right.
Okay. We always think the Buddha is out there. There's an old psychological book many years ago. It was trained. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. No, the Buddha is us. It's within us. Do we turn it over to a power greater than ourselves? Okay. If that works for your addiction, do that. But no, the power is within us.
Right.
We can reparent ourselves. So Tar-Anon basically is a place, a safe vessel every night to come to with other people. So at the Star Network, we're obviously making an impassioned plea to everybody who's out there. Take care of yourself, number one. Come to Tar-Anon. Tar-Anon to me is a way. I love it. I don't come in there as a clinician. I come in there as a star. Okay, let me see one of these buttons here. Yes. I come here as a star, a survivor of toxic, abusive relationships, just like everybody. We don't see that you have a problem. In fact, picking that person was quite natural. Don't blame yourself. Forgive yourself. You know, it's not your fault because you were wired that way to pick that person since childhood.
Yeah.
However, it may not be your fault, but your healing is your responsibility.
100%. 100%. Anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Jamie, before we wrap?
I would like to add this. I'd like to add thank you to you. You know, I think the work that you do with your community is beyond powerful. In our thousands of people that come to Tar-Anon, they all know you. They all have seen your work. And I think at the Star Network, we couldn't be happier to have somebody as you as international ambassador.
Oh, thank you.
I agonized whether it should be another male because I thought there was too much testosterone maybe in the room here. But then I realized, you know, how many people are attracted to your community that are women. In fact, disproportionately, you have more women than men, which is natural because I think women can get more in touch with their emotions and men were actually taught not to come in.
Men are a hard to sell.
Men is a hard sell. I work with men. You and I, hopefully in the future, will work with men. But they have a lot to learn. They have a lot to learn from women in terms of affect and emotion and the ability to heal. But I also realize that, you know, you're in recovery. I'm in recovery. There's an androgyny about people in recovery of embracing all sides of themselves.
I think that's a big factor is when you're in the clinical mode and you're being neurosafe, it's a pretty androgynous state that you're in. Really, it's not men and women, is it really? You're just in human. You're in full human mode.
You are. And
or trying to be at least.
We are. And I'll end with this because we say that Tar-Anon. We're going to be releasing the book Tar Tales, which is the big book of Tar-Anon, which is about neuroregulation. How do I do things? You're going to be a prominent part of the digital book. And what I always say, one of the chapters in the book is that values are the garlic and crucifix to the energy vampire.
Nice.
And so I'll say this in wrapping up. I think the reason why we work together so well at the Star Network and you is your values too. I mean, in your recovery, and I can't say I always had these. I think my values got very off put. It fell off the train at some point when I started realizing I wasn't that important. I could take emotional abuse and I could actually recreate my childhood. What did I mean to myself? But when you get back on the recovery sort of healing road, you realize that values are the part of you that if you operate in the gray, and we all do, only the cluster B operates in the black and white.
Yes.
It's what's going to pull you back. So I tell my daughter always asks me, she says, well, Richard Grannon is your international star ambassador. And I say, baby, this is a value-based decision because that's your values, Richard. I know your values too. And I know we waver and we're no Buddhas. We all go back and forth in these, but we get back up. We fall 7 times and get up 8. And so I only really want to work with people who are grounded in values. And so from everybody, especially at this time of year, we want to say we're deeply grateful to work with you.
Thank you.
And I know the All-Star Cruise and May 1st through May 4th that we're going to do our darndest to reunite people and play on the ocean and have their international ambassador there as their
it should be good
keynote. It'll be a blast because playing again is what childhood should have been about, right? Just play.
Yeah.
I always tell people, and I'll leave it like this, you can come see me as a therapist or you can hang around a child and watch and dance like nobody's looking just like them. So in any case, I'm deeply grateful to be here in Liverpool to reunite with you, and let's carry on. And remember, if you don't break the family trauma will break you.
Ladies and gents, for Star Network, thank you very much for your time and your attention. If you want to know more, please click through to this link here, and you can get all the information there. Thank you, Dr. Jamie.
Thank you. And stay gold, Richard.
Stay gold.
Stay gold.